So to begin, first I want to make a statement which I said last week, last Sunday night, and that is when we talk about the Erev Rav, which I had mentioned what they are, I just want to say that the Erev Rav is secular Zionism. It is not religious Zionism, because I specifically said the concept of an Erev Rav is a person, okay, that is basically a leader, not a follower. Jews are not Erev Rav. Leaders are. But the real characterization of an Erev Rav is somebody who sins and causes others to sin with a wanton disregard of the Torah. On the contrary, he tries to influence people to abandon the Torah, which is the unique bond that the Jews have with God. It's a very important idea. That's an Erev Rav, but not a religious Zionist. Okay. Last week I had ended off in a certain way. I think I ended off with Obama. That's a favorite topic of mine, what can I tell you? And there's certain things I want to say about, before I leave Obama, just to finish up on this particular peculiar individual. And that is that the gematria of Obama, and if you realize that, Barak Obama, written in Hebrew, the numerical value of his name is Mashiach. Lest anybody think that he's Messiah. No, he's not. Because the gematria of Mashiach is also Nochosh, snake. And that, of course, refers to the Satan. Why does Obama have a gematria of Mashiach and Nochosh? Because he can be either one. What Obama really was, and it's amazing how he missed it. I had mentioned that there are two major nations that were extant in ancient history, in the Jewish history. One was Yishmael, the son of Avraham Avinu, and of course the second one is Esav, Edom, and I mentioned who they are in today's time. So what the Rasham really wants is that both of them should do tshuva, should repent. And he wants them to both be part of the tikkun process. That means the Jews are involved, as I had mentioned last week, and this of course is part 2, the Jews are involved in what's called the tikkun process. And I explained what that is last week. And whoever's involved in the tikkun process, not only that, but whoever assists the Jews in doing that will get reward which is incomprehensible. Everybody will do tshuva in the end. We know that, right? Because when the Mashiach comes, then everybody realizes what the truth is. It's completely open. It is no longer concealed. But they don't get reward for that because obviously it is now openly revealed what is the truth. But those who assist or do the tikkun process in the darkness, the reward is incomprehensible. So what the Russian wants to do is he wants to have these two Umas Ha'olam, Yishmael, who are the Arabs, the Muslims, and also Edom, which is basically Christianity and Western civilization. He wants them to do tshuva before the end. And that's a tremendous merit that they had. As far as I'm concerned, Obama, he was the Mashiach of Yishmael. And I mentioned what a Messiah is. A Messiah is an individual that tries to influence the world in a major way to adapt a certain program or lifestyle. And Obama, a Mashiach ben Yishmael, would be an individual who is would try to get the Arabs to back off from attacking Israel and for recognizing the greatness of Israel. And what the Russian did with Obama is very interesting. In 2008, you have to think about this. Obama was voted in. It's miraculous. The man was nobody, from nowhere. And yet he came out of nowhere to capture the hearts of the entire American people. Like I said last time, we're not talking here about an inauguration. Obama was never inaugurated as president. He was coronated as a messiah. This was the feeling that Americans felt when he was elected. So the question is, what in the world does that mean? Because what the Russians want, and in a certain sense, he was a messianic figure of Yishmael. What his job, and he is a Muslim, basically, and his job was to confront the Islamic world and say, hey, what are you guys talking about? What do you mean occupied territory? You don't have occupied territory. The territory that you have obviously belongs to Israel. Israel has biblical rights to this, historical rights, and they have legal rights because the UN accepted the League of Nations appointment of Israel as being part of the Jewish nation. So what are you talking about, occupied? So he should have confronted them, remove the entire concept of a two-state solution. What does two states mean? Who ever heard of giving part of your land in order to secure peace from any nation? It's unheard of. And what he should have done is in some way confront them, but he didn't do that. So therefore, he missed his opportunity. On the contrary, the first foreign prime minister, whatever, not a prime minister, but first foreign leader that he talked to was Abbas, Mohammed Abbas, and which of course is absurd. And then he gave that speech in Cairo after he was elected. Obviously, he failed. So therefore, he could have been a Mashiach of Yishmael had he done the job that he was supposed to do. But not only that, God gave him an incredible opportunity. He gave him, not only he made him president of the United States from somebody who was nobody. I mean, what did he have? The only claim to fame was as a community organizer, which is absurd. The only thing left if you're not a community organizer is to become president of the United States. You have to recognize the hand of God that this is impossible for a person. But that was his mission, which he failed. So therefore, instead of being a Mashiach, he became a Nachash, the exact opposite. Somebody who would try to backstab the Jewish people, which he did with incredible alacrity and so on. In any case, this is the concept. And the Baruch Hashem did him he made it easy because he gave him both houses of Congress. He could have done anything. He had the wishes of the American people. He had the admiration of the American people. You see, he even had the Congress behind him. His power was awesome. And he failed. What a fool. That's all I can say. Not to recognize what the mission that he could have had. And that's, of course, part of his problem. He's a megalomaniac. That's part of his problem. But okay, that's his problem. In any case. But he did do a tremendous favor for the Jews. And I mentioned last week the concept of the UN, which is really the prophetic fulfillment of Gog and Magog. I mentioned this last week. But besides the fact that that's an acceleration of the prophecy, that Gog and Magog has been fulfilled, and therefore God, the Rabbi Shem, can now accelerate or move on to the rest of the process. In many ways, he did us a tremendous favor, Obama, by doing that. And he's not even aware of that. Because what he did is he really destroyed the two-state solution. That's really what it did. Because if the UN says that Israel occupies territory, Yehud and Shomron, and also Jerusalem, right? So then the question is, well, what's left for Israel to negotiate? You see, because if everything that they would have negotiated and made an Arab state is now really legally, according to the UN, the state that belongs to the Arabs, so what does Israel have to negotiate? It would be very interesting if they negotiated half of Tel Aviv, wouldn't it? It means we'll give you half of Tel Aviv. That'll be the Palestinian state, which of course they can't. So therefore, unwittingly, or as an unintended consequence, the UN has destroyed the two-state solution. So we have to thank Obama for that, actually. From all this, what do we see? We see that the Sultan is dying. And I mentioned that last week. We don't realize that the Sultan is almost bankrupt from all the holiness that he takes from the sins of the Jews. And therefore, what that does is makes the Sultan a very desperate angel. And we don't want to get in his way, because that gets very dangerous. And not only that, but I had mentioned last week also, is that Obama is the compromise that the Sultan made a deal with the Malach of Yishmael, the angel of Yishmael, to take the Kiddush of Yishmael, which I had mentioned last week. What does that mean? So, if the Sultan is dying, and Yishmael is dying also, how do we see this? You realize what's happening out there? It's unheard of. 8 states of the Arabs are failed states. They're dying. Which ones? We have Libya is dead. It's not a state anymore. Libya, we have Egypt, which is tottering because of ISIS. We have Yemen. Yemen is bankrupt. Okay. Then we have Lebanon, which is also tottering. And besides Lebanon, then of course you have Syria, which is over and done with. You have Iraq, which is over and done with, basically, you see. And then you have Afghanistan, which is basically ruled by a bunch of tribes. And even Jordan is frightened because the Palestinians who make up Jordan population, they're going to take over Jordan. And that's the end of, what's his name, Mohammed, That's the end of his rule because he's really a Saudi Arabia guy. He's not even Jordanian, and so on. So the amazing thing is that God has taken these people out without a bullet being fired. It's incredible. In fact, even the army has to change their tactics because there is no state that can confront Israel anymore. It's just terrorists, and that's the end of it. So we begin to see a tremendous, the hand of God, how God has removed Yishmael. So then the question is, what is the Sultan going to do? If Yishmael is dying, that means he doesn't have any Kedusha left, even to give the Sultan to survive. But the Sultan is a very wily creature, very interesting individual and so on. Well, he's dying. And he's not getting anything from Yishmael because they're all dying because their merit is also used up. In any case, so what does the Sultan do? So the Sultan goes to the file cabinet in heaven of all the Jews because we got a big file cabinet, and he picks out the file cabinet of the sins of the Jews, you see, because the only way he can survive is by pointing out to a sin of the Jews, okay, and taking whatever kedusha, holiness that they have, and then he can be yoine, can nourish off that itself. So what does the Sultan do? He pulls out the file cabinet, and of course there's always a sin there, no question. But you know what sin is always there? And he pulls it out. You know what sin that is? Lashon hara. Jews are always slandering and bad-mouthing and defaming other Jews, unfortunately, right? This is going. In fact, the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, baseless hatred, and we know that comes from what? Lashon hara. In fact, the Marshal, the great Marshal, and the Chavetz Chaim say that it wasn't sinas chinam that destroyed baseless hatred, groundless hatred, that destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash. It was really Lashon hara, which leads to that. They both say that. So what do we find? It's Lashon hara destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because it destroys the achdus of Klal Yisrael, destroys the unity of the Jewish people. The Jews have to love one another. Instead, how many times we find so many schisms among Jews and so on. So the Sultan pulls that out, and he's makatreg, because that's his weapon. He prosecutes the Jews in the heavenly tribunal. That's what he does. That's what his weapon is. And he wins. Interesting. What does that mean? So his victory is astounding. What he does is that he's able to get a guy into the government of Israel that hates the Jews. And this is midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Right? That's how we always, that's justice. So the Sultan says, wait a minute, they hate each other. They're always talking Lashon hara, right? So you know what their punishment should be? A guy that hates them and preaches the hatred of the Jewish people, especially, mostly, the hatred of the Haredim. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a guy elected, and his name is Yair Lapid. Now, the whole platform of Yair Lapid is to hate the Jews, to hate the Haredim, okay? But the incredible, how in the world did he become, how did he get 19 seats? I mean, this guy was a broadcast personality. How does that happen? Always look for the hand of God. When a guy comes out of nowhere, like Obama, it's always Yad Hashem. It's nothing more, you see. And what's his platform? Haredim. We need to destroy the Haredim because they are destroying the people of Israel. But that's the kitrug. That's the prosecution that the Sultan is now trying to take because of the fact that he's dying. But wait a minute. Remember, the Sultan only takes the kedusha of the sins of the Jews. So therefore, what's Lapid's platform? 3 distinct features. 1, well, they got to get all the Haredim into the army. Guess what? Even the Israelis recognize that the army is an incredible way to secularize everybody. That's really what it is. Even Ben Gurion felt that the army is a way of getting everybody to think like an Israeli. You see, which basically, according to Ben Gurion, was to secularize them. So if you send all the Haredim to the army, what happens to their mitzvahs really? Obviously, it's going to go basically downhill. But wait a minute, if it goes downhill and they sin, so the Sultan can take from their kedusha. So that's the first idea. Second thing, he wants to bankrupt all the yeshivas and kollels. No money, right? So automatically means all the Haredim have to go to work. Well, if they have to go to work, they'll be exposed to the secular society, and hopefully they'll sin more than what they're doing before. And as a result of that, the Sultan can now take much more food because of the sins of the Jews. And then he wants to invade the what's called the educational system, where the girls, the Beis Yaakovs, right? These are the future mothers of Israel that teach all their kids to observe the mitzvahs. And he wants to invade the curriculum of the Beis Yaakovs. You notice all these three things have one thing in common: to minimize the observance of the Jews, their Torah. So therefore, hopefully they would sin, and then the Satan can then take from all that sinning and be unique and survive. You see. So what does the Baruch Shem do? Because the Satan is makatreg. He's a very interesting prosecuting attorney, and he doesn't take bribes. Actually, he does take bribes, but anyway. So what happens? So the Baruch Shem is incredible how he deals with the Satan. He says, okay, now Lapid is Yair Lapid, and he's really, I hate to say that, but he's a satanic agent. It's really what it's all about, and so on. In any case, so what does the Baruch Shem do? Something amazing. Several years ago, after Lapid gets in, he all of a sudden has 3 teenagers that are kidnapped. Now, why these 3 teenagers were kidnapped, I don't know. But the amazing thing, what that event did, which is terrible, of course, right, is it united the entire state of Israel. You remember how much achdus there was? So therefore, what the Baruch Shem did is he went against the ketrugim that Klal Yisrael is destroying the achdus with Lashon Hara. So the Baruch Shem created an event of 3 teenagers being kidnapped. So all of a sudden there's a tremendous amount of achdus and love. Everybody, if you remember then a couple of years ago, everybody came out. There was an unbelievable feeling of camaraderie and brotherhood among the Jewish people. In order to do what? In order to counter the prosecution of the Satan. And guess what? Shortly after that, what happened? Netanyahu kicked out Lapid out of the government. Amazing. Because he had nothing to stand on. Because once the Jews had achieved a tremendous amount of achdus, okay, that negated the prosecutions of the Satan. Very interesting. And he was thrown out of, him and Livni were thrown out of the government shortly right after the incident of the kidnapping of these unfortunate teenagers. So what's the Satan doing today? Well, what he's doing today, as we will see, because his agenda is not over yet. What he's doing today is really incredible. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the reform movement is now seeking legitimacy. They never did that before. You see, why all of a sudden are the Reformed seeking legitimacy? And we know that with the Kessin and all that. And the idea is because that's another ploy of the Satan. Because he's hoping that the Reform movement will gain legitimacy in the state of Israel. And therefore they'll be able to have the abandonment of the Torah spread throughout. And as a result of that, he's hoping that the people will join the Reform movement and so on. And they'll sin, because that's exactly what happens when you join the Reform movement. Look, the Reform movement has destroyed Judaism. They have destroyed the Erev Rav. They have destroyed Judaism in the United States. What they've done to the United States is, the Judaism in the United States is horrendous. And that's why this is another ploy. Now that Lapid is gone, and it's another ploy to get Jews to sin so the Satan can be yonek, can take from that Kedusha. And that's essentially why it's happening again. But this is all part of the Satan's desire and his need to survive. That's basically what is happening. In any case, now, what is important also to know is that there's a medrash. Very interesting medrash. This medrash is a Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that was written 2,000 years ago. And it's astounding how accurate it is. But it's a very important medrash to keep in mind because it does foretell things that will happen. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, it's really Perek Lamed, the 30th Perek, and it says the following. Bi'achris hayomim, in the end of days, Osid Yishmael, the Arabs, will conduct 3 wars of terror against the world. That's what it says. It's amazing that medrash that would know that the Arabs would even exist 2,000 years later, let alone that they would conduct wars of terror. It mentions 3 of them. The first one, without going into it, although I think I do mention it on the tapes, is against the forest of Arabia. The second is against the sea. But the third prophecy, the third prophetic statement of that medrash is astounding. It says that Yishmael will conduct a war of terror against the great city of Rome. Krach Godel Sheberoimi. That's what it says. Who is the great city of Rome today? I mean, then it was Rome, obviously, because the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer was written at the time of Rome. But who are they talking about? And the answer to that is something very fascinating. The great city of Rome today, if you think about it, let's take a look. Esav, the Torah says Esav. Esav is Edom. The Torah says Esav zu Edom. Edom is a nation. Edom is who? Edom is Rome. The Gemara says Edom zu Romi. Edom is Rome. Rome is Christianity, and Christianity is Western civilization. The Krak Godel Sheben Romi, the greatest city of Rome is New York City. It is the greatest city in the world, basically, I mean, there are many great cities, but New York is really where it's at, and it's a port city. Everybody enters the United States basically from New York and so on, but it is one of probably the greatest city on the planet. It never, and let me tell you something. If you go in Manhattan at 3 a.m., you think it was 12 daylight time. It never sleeps. There's a whole night population in New York, right? And there's a day population. And you wonder, when do these guys at night sleep? But it's just, everything is open at night. I mean, it's just incredible what goes on in New York for those who've been in New York, Manhattan especially, But New York is the Krak Godel Sheben Romi. And what is that medrash referring to? What is the great act of terror that the Arabs have committed against New York City? The World Trade Center. That's what it is, you see. So it predicts that there will be a tremendous act of terror against New York City, which is the great city of Rome, and so on. And then it says in the same medrash, very interesting, it says that Umikan Yitzmach ben David, from that event begins the concept of ben David. Now, whenever it says Yitzmach, that Mashiach ben David will sprout, it doesn't mean ben Mashiach ben David, it means Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's the one who comes first. So it says that from that event, what will happen is Mashiach ben Yosef will sprout, and he's going to watch. Watch what? He's going to watch as the great clash of civilizations, as the Muslims try to take out Western civilization, and as Western civilization will take out the Arabs. He's talking about the clash of civilizations. That's what that medrash is referring to. Okay? And then it says, and this is what the Mashiach is going to watch as this happens. And then it says, Umisham, and from there, he's going to come to Eretz Yisrael. That's what it says. Sounds like the Mashiach was an American, that he comes from America, where he's going to watch that, and he's going to come to Eretz Yisrael. Anyway. But don't worry, it's not Donald Trump. In any case, this is a medrash, but what that medrash reveals, and by the way, this is also in the end of Yoel, that talks about the clash of civilizations at the same time, and at the end of Yoel, and Perek Dalet at the end, and the Malbim talks extensively about this concept, the great clash of civilizations between the Yishmael and the Christianity or Western civilization. And you should know one thing, that it's exactly what's happening today. You have there are 1.7 billion Muslims in the world, and there's 2 billion Christians. When the Muslims will reach 2 billion, that's what's going to happen. There's going to be a tremendous war of the Arabs with Western civilization, especially with Israel. There will be a final clash, because they're not going to sit down and allow Israel to exist, because the Muslims theologically cannot allow that. In fact, that's why, which is astounding when you think about that, it's impossible for Arabs to make peace with Israel. It's impossible for 3 reasons. One is that they believe that the lands that the Arabs have occupied can never be given away. So therefore, they are theologically commanded. They cannot give Israel back to the Jews, number one. The second thing is, whoever does give that will be assassinated the next day. In fact, Clinton asked Arafat, well, what's the problem? Why don't you, these guys are willing to negotiate, the Oslo Accords in September of 1993. Why don't you just negotiate with the guy? So you know what Arafat said? He's, you out of your mind? The moment I do that, that's it. I'm dead the next day. Because they'll kill him, which is what the Arabs will do. The third reason is also very important. Because if the Arabs negotiate peace with Israel, which means with all the countries in the United Nations, what that's going to mean that according to international law, they've recognized Israel as legitimate. So then how can they now go back and make war with Israel? So they will have enshrined the legality of the existence of a Jewish state for all time. And therefore, if they do attack Israel, Israel can attack them legitimately and legally as part of international law. So for those three reasons, it is impossible for the Arabs to make peace. It's incredible to watch how foolish people are, as if they really think the Arabs can make peace, and they can't. Of course the Arabs are not going to admit that. So they're going to obviously put some kind of condition where they're going to look good, like saying, okay, we want the 500,000 Arabs that ran away from Israel, we want them to come back, which of course is impossible because that's the end of the state of Israel. But they'll do that in order to avoid being blamed. But they cannot. Why is it? That's why peace is impossible. They have never negotiated peace. It doesn't make a difference. They cannot make peace with Israel. And therefore, it's amazing to watch how all these think tanks think that you can actually have peace with Israel. And America's under that delusion, as we will see. And that's basically why something like that can really never happen. Of course, what that Medrash is saying, basically, is that the Arabs therefore will conduct a war against Israel. And I mentioned last week the whole concept of Poras, Persia, Iran. That's one of the reasons why Iran is nuclear, and so on, because this will be part, and I mentioned the Medrash last week, this will be part and parcel of the clash of civilizations, where Iran is now actually part of that, and so on, In any case, so this seems to be, this is what's going on so far, okay. But there's certain other things that we really have to understand and grab a hold of.